Hey everyone, I'm Albert Boris. Alright, so Mario Kart World is a controversial game. I don't think that would be controversial to say.
Say that again?
But yeah, ever since this game came out all the way back in June last year, personally, I refuse to believe it's been that long already. I don't think I've seen quite any other Nintendo release in recent years with quite as divided of a reception among people. Maybe Pokemon Scarlet and Violet comes close, but even that's a hard bargain. There are so many people that both love and hate this game. Which, I mean, I guess it's understandable, considering how much it drastically changed the Mario Kart experience as we know it, but I can't say it's not at least a little disappointing to see how much it divided the community. But you know who's also controversial? I am! Or well, at least my game opinions are, apparently. And that's why I figured, why don't I copy Odyssey Central and do the exact same thing he did?
You really are running out of video ideas, aren't you?
Okay, I know this looks bad, but I don't know, can you really trademark a video series as basic in concept as this? No, I don't think so. And I mean, since it still seems like we're not getting DLC for this game anytime soon, I might as well do this now rather than later. And personally, I figured it would be fun to rummage through some of my controversial opinions I have on Mario Kart World. With that said, however, I also didn't want to be basic and just repeat takes I've already made clear on my channel from my other videos. No, I'm gonna try to go out of my way to bring up takes that I usually don't see people arguing for at all, to try and keep it as fresh as possible. And then at the end, or rather halfway through the video in this case, I'm also gonna bring up some of your hot takes on the game, because I might as well just go all out now that I'm here. So anyways, let's go! So starting off somewhat lightly, one of the big new additions I see people absolutely clamoring for in this game, but which I couldn't care less for, are the character costumes. That's probably a little hypocritical of me to say. On the whole, I think it's absolutely cute and welcoming that certain characters got new costumes you could choose to raise them in, since they do add more variety and personality to the otherwise rather trite classic characters at this point. Especially for Peach, I seriously love the contrast of how casual her alternate costumes are. However, for the most part, I personally pretty much always prefer my characters to just look normal. Partly because that's how I know them from their original games, but more importantly because their original designs are what made me fall in love with them to begin with. They're the ones that best capture what the characters are meant to be like. And while the other outfits are certainly nice alternatives, a lot of them definitely don't feel as iconic, or even as colorful. Either that or they sometimes just look dumb. Am I happy for their existence? Yeah, no doubt, besides how horribly implemented they are in the character select screen. But whereas for some it's a big deal that Deke and Pauline only have one costume while the others have like 10, for me, if none of them were in the game, it wouldn't exactly have been a bother. They're cool, but I don't love them. At the very least, it's more what I can say for this next batch of characters, whom I absolutely hate. Namely, the so-called NPC drivers. Now, in general, I think the roster of Mario Kart World is actually really good, particularly when it comes to the returning characters, since we not only have almost all of the classics, but even a couple of oddballs are back yet again, like Wiggler and Abbots. However, the new characters were almost all a complete miss for me. The vast majority of them are just the most basic Mario enemies you could think of, and while there is a bit of a comedic factor in how they let pretty much anyone on the kart now, I think it's more wasted than anything, since not only are a lot of them just completely generic design-wise, but they shouldn't even realistically be able to drive a vehicle anyway since they lack the anatomy necessary for it.
Dude, this is a series about a plumber who eats stars and beats up talking turtles, and you're seriously complaining about the realism?
Don't even go there, Bertel. Yeah, I know Mario isn't exactly a realistic franchise to begin with, but that's not the point. Whereas other unrealistic elements like how power-ups work or how Bowser escapes death are usually much more vague or rooted in fantasy, or at least serve an engaging gameplay function, this right here is so on the nose not possible, and it just looks completely out of place as a result. In the end, there's like, what? 5 new characters in total I'd say were actually worthy additions, but beyond that, I would have much rather wished they'd focus on giving us actual established characters with unique designs. Like there's a whole goldmine of them in the RPGs, why don't they use them more? Most people seem to love how whimsical these additions are, which is fine, we all have our own tastes, but personally I think it's just a tad too extreme to be funny after the shock wears off. Next though, how about a course-related hot take? I've talked a lot about my thoughts on the retro tracks in this game already, so I'm not gonna bring up any of those again, even if my Desert Tales and Airship Fortress opinions are probably the most controversial ones, so instead I'm gonna say this. I think DK Spaceport is way too overrated. Most of the rankings I've seen of this game put this track in the top half, if not even top 10, but while I enjoyed it fairly enough at first, it has really fallen off over time. It's just such a repetitious and samey track where all you do is drive in a bunch of barely changing straight lines. At first, it's exciting how it escalates, especially in the context of Grand Prix. But then you play it again, and you realize it's just not nearly as dynamic as most other tracks. Even shortcut-wise, the most you have is just some off-road during the transitional turns. Otherwise, there's not a lot of variety to how each section plays out. And the barrels are barely much of a hazard either. I guess the 4th and 5th sections are a little more dynamic, since they at least have some semblance of split paths, but even that is so surface level compared to other tracks, and they're over before it even starts. I still think it's a fine-ish track, I appreciate the atmosphere and idea, however looking back, this isn't far from my bottom 5, and I think it's especially disappointing how unique the idea for a spaceport track is, and all we get is just arcade fan service that could have been part of any other theme. However, by far my favorite instance of unintentional fan service to me personally was the addition of the free roaming mode. Not only is this my absolute favorite part of the whole game, but I'm also just about completely satisfied with everything about it. Ever since I got my first ever Mario Kart game, all I ever wanted to do was just to be able to explore every nook and cranny for the heck of it, just to see what more there was to this world. So to find out this game would not only allow that, but even put all of its tracks into a connected world for me to drive around in, you have no idea how much that ecstasized me. Especially since they even included optional missions and collectibles all over the map to give you something more to do. And when people say that the open world is empty and pointless, I think in a lot of instances, they're seeing it as something it's not meant to be. As cool as it would be to have a story mode or boss fights tied to this open world as well, free roam itself is just meant to be a way for you to wind down and explore this vast world without being constricted to the races that take place on it. And while that's something a lot of adults aren't enchanted by anymore, for a child with a limitless curiosity and imagination, it can be a very big deal, and I wish I had the privilege of growing up with this. And this is also why I think the outrage over online and intermissions and all that is also a bit overblown, because, at least for me, there's just other things to keep me engaged with the game anyways. Including Knockout Tour, but I'm not gonna talk about that here, since I'm pretty sure most people enjoy it. Another thing I believe to be overblown by people, albeit this time for how good it is the soundtrack. Even within just a few hours after getting the game for the first time, my feelings on it were something along the lines of, whoa, this is average. You guys love this? Like, here's the thing, I absolutely respect the soundtrack, specifically the jukebox, which is what I'm mainly referring to in this segment. I thought it was absolutely genius to remix hundreds of classic Mario tunes to act as alternating background music for the menus and the free roaming of the game. Not only is it a beautiful nod to the whole franchise, but above all, it gives you something nice to hum along to, so it doesn't feel all quiet. The jukebox serves its purpose beautifully, however, it's also because of this purpose that most of the remixes don't stand out as tunes themselves. Their purpose is just to give you something vague in the background that's memorable enough to breathe life into the atmosphere, but not enough to take away the concentration of what you're doing at all. And as such, most of the remixes end up just being the same breed of quiet, harmless elevator music with no prominent instruments taking the lead, and it all just blends together in the end, even despite the fact that some songs are of different genres. At best, I can only tell apart the day theme styled remixes from the nighttime ones. And again, all of this is fine for the purpose they fill, but I also don't think the individual songs themselves are anything that memorable. The fact is, these are remixes with melodies that were initially composed for entirely different scenarios in their respective games, and when you strip all of that so they can fulfill the same common purpose, they just don't end up popping out the same way. And while I wouldn't change any of this, there is also no universe where I'd rather spontaneously listen to these over just the original songs. And lastly, my final hot take I wanted to go over before I look at all of yours is about the price. No, I don't think $80 is a justifiable cost for it. Actually, I'd be concerned if anyone thought that. It's clearly not got the customization or amount of content for such an egregious amount. And even if it did, it's just insane for an inevitable bestseller anyways. What I do think, however, is that the price does not affect the quality of the game. Like, Jesus Christ, the fact that this is such a big talking point in a lot of circles honestly speaks for how disingenuous a lot of internet discourse is. And this is just for something as trivial as gaming. Seriously, the price is not something you experience in the game. It's just a dumb external gate Nintendo put before if you want a new copy. If anything should get hate for this, it's Nintendo themselves for being so greedy, since it would be a net win for them regardless. However, the game itself and its internal qualities does not change whether Nintendo decides you should fork over 50, 80, or get it for free. And in the future, this is especially not gonna matter as much when used copies become more commonplace, and they inevitably always go for much cheaper anyways. Heck, most first-party Switch 1 games I buy these days tend to fall in the $30 to $40 range, despite them being $60 when they first came out. Here's the thing, it's absolutely fair to be mad about the price. I was especially pissed since the Swedish prices were even more egregious. But Mario Kart World itself is the same regardless, and I think using it as an unironic knock against the game is just completely dishonest and misses the point entirely of where the criticism should be headed. But anyways, that's about it for my biggest hot takes on the game. There certainly are more, but those mostly just revolve around individual tracker cup opinions. And I think I've talked about them plenty in other videos, so now we move on to the comments. I won't be able to address all of them, but I'll try to respond to the most I think will make for the most interesting discussions. First up, we have NotDonut77, who says, I don't get why people talk about DLC like they're expecting it to be revealed soon. I feel like if the team are gonna add more islands like what the common theory is, that would take a while to develop, and I would guess that we'll get an announcement in like a year plus from now on. Personally, if you ask me, I don't think those assumptions are too left field. Knowing that this game initially started development back in 2017 and was even going to be released for the original Switch 1 first, before they realized they couldn't handle it, I wouldn't be too shocked to find out if Mario Kart World may have already been finished for years, and they just waited until the Switch 2 was ready for it to come out. And under that assumption, you could draw the conclusion that they've been working on a DLC map for quite a while now. At least that's what I hope, but while I can see this being the case, I'm proud of you for keeping your expectations low, because for all we know, Nintendo might also think it's already got all it needs. Anyways, next we have a comment from NanyaBusiness8919. And he thinks that routes, not intermissions, have never bothered me that much. I find them fun enough, especially with the insane shortcut opportunities some of them provide, and they don't take away too much of the Grand Prix experience for me. While I would love for there to be an option to turn them off, I'm not particularly affected by their inclusion. You know what, I'm largely in the same boat as you. While I do think the intermission tracks, no I will not call them routes, are noticeably worse than the actual courses due to the fact they're fundamentally limited by needing to connect two courses, I absolutely don't mind playing on them, just because the Mario Kart World parkour mechanics make driving so much fun that these straight lines end up being shockingly engaging still for what they are. That's not to say there shouldn't be an option to turn off, but at the end of the day, I can personally live without it. There is a bunch of other modes to play in the game beyond online versus anyways. And again, Knockout Tour handles them perfectly, precisely for the reasons you brought up. So yeah. Next though, we have a comment from Pixel Prime 807, who says as following, my personal hot take would be that adding a free lap mode would kind of defeat the whole purpose of the game. Yes, it would be cool, but at the same time, it would kind of feel like just fan service. The creators of the game had a vision, and yes, many would argue that they didn't execute it well, but their vision still stands, whether the fans are happy or not. I mean... Here's the thing, there is a free lap mode, it's just that they only put it in the offline versus mode. So how would it exactly defeat the purpose of the game to add it online as well? It's absolutely understandable that the developers of the game had a specific vision they wanted to fulfill, with the open world and all, and I absolutely respect that. But not all visions ultimately lead to a better experience, and if you have the time and resources to address that, which believe me, Nintendo absolutely does, it's a pretty big display of hubris that they leave it completely untouched, as if to tell people they should enjoy it a specific way. Especially because this would be so simple to fix. Driving between tracks is certainly a big point of the game, however, it is not the only point, otherwise free lap tracks wouldn't be a thing at all here. The main point is still the courses and the new gameplay mechanics. At least that's my take. But anyways, next up from Bendixi, we have a take that goes as following, I really don't mind the character unlock system all too much. It's kind of fun and hype when you get a character just randomly in a race. The only reason I dislike it is because there are so many cooler ways we could be unlocking them, especially with free roam. I mean, here's the thing, I can see the charm of unlocking something mid-race that you didn't even intend to. But at least for me, that's also only if I still earned it by doing something, even if you didn't realize it. Take Kirby Air Riders for example, I think that game handled it almost perfectly, where you had an absolute buttload of achievements you could aim towards getting, with a good chunk of which you'd most likely obtain without meaning to. It was fun to randomly get that notification while playing, but you also still had the option to specifically work for them if you so desired, whereas here, yeah, it's pretty much just all luck. Before the free roam UFO or custom items updates, you could potentially never unlock everyone, and that lack of agency is why it was so especially hateable at first. Now it's less egregious, but I also can't say I'm much more than tolerate it, just because like you said, there were so many better ideas. Up next, we have a comment from Platy4700. Hoofings is following. While I agree that Wario's Galleon is a little worse from a pure gameplay standpoint, it is far better presentation-wise. The grim, gothic lighting and colors paired with the rough waves makes it feel far more immersive, as if you're exploring a real shipwreck. And it helps that the music is a lot better. I mean, I'll give you that. While the purple and yellow color palette of the original definitely made it feel more like a Wario track, if we're just judging the theme in a vacuum, I definitely agree that the remix take does suitably feel a lot more atmospheric and mysterious. Oh. Yeah, never mind. That's 10 years of Nintendine for you. Anyways, what's next? I know you dislike Mario Galaxy. Bertolt, did you snitch on me, you little—
Dude, you made a whole ass rant video about it. Of course they know.
Oh, right. Wait, it wasn't a rant! Anyways, next we have Vegetables1593, who thinks that 24 players should have been Knockout Tour exclusive. 24 in standard races is absolutely miserable at times. You have so much less control over the race, it's ridiculously chaotic. And that's not a good thing! There's standard Mario Kart chaos, and then there's 24 people online chaos. You know what, I agree somewhat in principle. While I don't personally dislike having 24 racers in versus mode, I do believe that more often than not, it is way too chaotic for its own good. Particularly in the really narrow tracks such as Toad's Factory, Airship Fortress, and Shy Guy Bazaar, where oftentimes it usually feels like a complete crapshoot if it's gonna go well for me or not, because there are just so many items everywhere at all times. And by contrast, Knockout Tour does actually handle it quite well, since most of the incessant chaos only takes place in the first few stretches, before people inevitably get eliminated, and because of the enormous shortcut opportunities, it's usually easy to make a comeback. I think it's fine to have 24 players in versus as an option, but the fact that we can't turn it off and just have good old 12 people races does sting a lot more than I want to admit. And it's an additional reason I don't like to go online for versus most of the time. Actually, I think that's a bigger problem than the intermission tracks being common. At the end of the day, I think it's still better than Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's online, since at least this game has the wonderful tech to compensate, but it could be better. Next up is a take from fellow content creator Kerblay, who says that the coin shell is one of the best items in the series. I get that it can be frustrating to get at the end of the race and have no chance of catching up, but in terms of being a well-balanced item that creates the perfect amount of chaos and strategy, this rides the line perfectly. As there's that perfect risk/reward factor if I can get hit easily in the middle of the track, but also collect a ton of coins to gain an advantage. Yeah, there's just one problem. The coins barely dictate my top speed anyways with all the items flying around, so I could not disagree more. I think it's a complete waste of an item slot that could have gone to something that at least had some sort of noticeable consequence. At least in Mario Kart Tour, the coins went toward your global counter, so you could use them to buy stuff in the shops, but since Mario Kart World isn't a live service game— actually wait, imagine how cool that would be. Oh well, alright, now here's a kicker of a take from Captain Rillaboom. Boo Cinema is a really bad track. The theme is the only thing it has going for it, but it was executed so poorly. The layout sucks, the music sucks, the color palette is not appealing at all, there are no sections in the track that have obstacles or gimmicks that are interesting, and the difficulty makes the track feel like something that could be in a flower or banana cup. Yes! Finally! Someone said it after all this time. Okay, but jokes aside, I really do find myself agreeing with this more and more as the months go by. People rightfully call out Starview Bleak for being a whole bunch of nothing, but Boo Cinema isn't much better. It's cool that you go through a movie screen, and beyond that, it's just a couple of turns. Honestly, this track made me hate the Absolute Cinema meme. Anyways, if the Kamek item didn't have character unlocks tied to it, I think people would actually like it a lot more. It's a really unique concept, and I like how the hazards can mix things up. You know what? That's just true, Pika Phantom. Pretty much all of the discourse I see surrounding this item always just ends up boiling down to it being the main way to unlock new characters. However, as an item on the road, it's absolutely a cool way to spice up the race, and give us additional variables to worry about. I just wish it didn't come at the cost of so many races being hazardless without Kamek, but hey, if it was more common, that would be great. Eldar VD1 Gem says that for me, Bowser's Castle is a very mid course. Don't get me wrong, it's a peak track online when I play it, and I do love it. But the reason for it being so good is because of the insane shortcuts. Nintendo never intended us to do shortcuts like that. If you play the track like Nintendo wants you to, the normal way, then you'd have a very boring and underwhelming experience for a Bowser's Castle track. Is this a bad take or no? Well, since you asked, here's the thing. I can see how the track is a little boring when you don't consider the tech tied to it in mind. That's why I too thought it was a little mediocre the first times I played it. Where you are absolutely wrong, however, is implying that none of the insane shortcuts were intended. Believe me, they absolutely were. Why else did Nintendo allow us to trick off of anything without issue? Heck, the idea that they're not intended shortcuts falls especially flat when you consider just how strong of a focus this game already has on split paths and cutoffs. Sure, maybe not every shortcut was specifically planned out, but they're still possible because of the intended physics and gameplay mechanics that the developers put into the game. They're not glitches. It's fine to not enjoy the track, but clearly you claim you do, so to answer if yours is a bad take or not, yes, I think it very much is, and purely because it's based off a misconception. And finally, what better way to conclude fan takes than from Thomas2001, who finally played battle mode yesterday and thinks that it's not that bad honestly. I had fun with it. I know a bunch of maps are in the same place as race courses, but unlike in 8, it really doesn't feel that way since you can go anywhere. The forced time limit is a shame, and I wish there were a few more modes, but otherwise, it's quite good. Jesus Christ, how can a member of my own community say something so horrible? Okay, but seriously, this has got to be by far the most disagreeable take I've stumbled up on here. Because while I will give in and admit that the battle mode is far and away better than it was in Mario Kart 8, since the arenas are actually more optimized to be battled on, I also can't say it feels like they went nearly far enough to still make them feel like battle stages. Yes, you may not be constricted to narrow paths anymore, but their layouts still feel like either a complete mess or just completely empty, and so comically large I struggle finding people. And the unfitting music choices don't help either. The only compliment I can give to battle mode, and specifically balloon battle, is that at least losing all your balloons does eliminate you, giving it some stakes. That and at least Big Donut is an actual battle stage. But otherwise, I think it's just so flawed and forgettable. Especially because all the off-road everywhere still slows you down, which makes it uncomfortable to go out of the narrow pathways anyways. So even if we get more battle modes in the future, like Bob-omb Blast or Shine Thief, it's not gonna budge my perception, because the fact that there's only 2 battle modes is the least of my concerns. But anyways, with all of that being said, I think that's just about enough hot takes for this video.
What? But you didn't even read half of them. What about everyone else who poured their heart and soul into it?
Since when did you care so much? I thought you wanted nothing to do with humans.
Humans or not, at least they have better takes than you.
Oh yeah, well how about they take you and launch you back to our home planet? But yeah, I'd love to go over even more of y'all's opinions. There was way more than this in the comment section, but I also don't want this video to overstay its welcome and get too overly long, so I think this is a good point to conclude. And hey, there's always more chances if I make more videos like this in the future. With that said, I hope you all enjoyed watching this video and my arguments to your takes, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to get notified for all of my upcoming content. And so, I'm signing off now, until next time.
Albert Boris!